So we shall now move on to the next speakers, two in fact. Views from Madame Julie Ho, she's principal of the Raffles Girls' School, Singapore, and Mrs. Mary Sherian. She's director of the Pedagogical Research Laboratory, the Raffles Girls' School, Singapore. They'll be talking under the topic of differentiated instructions for the differentiated classrooms. Ladies and gentlemen, Madame Ho and Mrs. Sherian.
Right. Well, a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Sawadee. It's my third year at Educa, and it has been a complete privilege and pleasure to come back every year. And I want to thank the organizers of Educa for giving me this opportunity again to meet up with wonderful educators and academics and policymakers I have met in the last 3 years. I've always been very moved by the experiences and the knowledge and the sharing that you have given me. Every time I've been here, I feel a great sense of urgency. I feel a great determination to constantly improve with Thailand's education system. And I think that, looking at the sponsors and the collaborators of Educa, it speaks of a very strong tripartite concern, because the corporate, the government, and the schools and universities are working together to bring together such a conference. And that speaks a lot about your intention to really move on with improvement. This morning we've heard from Sir Michael Barber, and Sir Michael has taken us to the 10,000 feet high altitude perspective on school systems and school reforms across the world. We've also heard from Professor Loiman from Finland, and his perspectives and insights and wisdom on curriculum development, asking really essential questions about curriculum. Where we have the privilege as Raffles Girls' School from Singapore to be a part of this dialogue and session really is, and I thank the organizers for putting this session in, because we hope to bring to you the perspective from the smallest unit of any education system, and that is the school. How every school plays a very central and important part in the reform which is a national movement. This morning, something that Kun Sinchai said in his opening about how even though there are very urgent concerns like the flood situation in Thailand, he reminded us all that a very current priority like this is not delinked from education. And in fact, it is because of education and what we do in education to bring out the best in every child that we will be able in future to avert situations like the flood. And I think that's a really important concept to bear in mind, because if we do not remember the child and the school that serves the child in education, we would have wasted our time in our work. So we're hoping to bring the perspective of today's dialogue to centralize and focus on providing the best possible instruction to every child, which is really one of the 3 success factors. If you have read the executive summary and the report that was put out, which is Sir Michael Barber's work for McKinsey & Company in 2007, 3 factors. First, teacher quality. Secondly, effective instructors. And thirdly, the best possible instruction for every child. And I ask myself, what is the best possible instruction for every child? That basically assumes that you must ask yourself, what is best for every unique child? So we need to be tailoring schools and systems contextually. So a lot of these have been in the keynotes that have been presented this morning. Remind us that systems need to really be pushing and pulling. What is top down and bottom up, there is a tension, and systems develop, right? And every system has its own trajectory and pathway of growth. We need to be able to, in all our systems be able to find that right balance between what is top-down and what is bottom-up, and allowing our schools to make local decisions because they know best what their children need. So this is really the perspective that we in RGS hope to be able to share. We have a narrative to present, but we are part of a larger Singapore system. And I hope to be able to really do justice to this half hour that we've been given. I have invited a co-speaker to join me, and Mrs. Cherian will actually give you details about curriculum differentiation in Raffles Girls' School. And this is us. And just to frame it and contextualize it, this is taken from the synopsis for this particular dialogue session, and we are focusing on what are the challenges of leading education systems in educating their people for a knowledge economy. These are indeed global issues facing many school systems today. But successful curriculum and instruction reform has different success factors, and the achievement relies on whether you eventually are able to sustain that achievement in the long term. Right? So how is school-wide reform done and achieved? Now we've tailored our presentation and our sharing with you in response to this challenge that is presented here. And as per the request of the organizers, we are therefore speaking on our experience in differentiated instruction for a differentiated classroom. So this is us, school reform in line with systemic reform, a narrative from RGS. And I just want to present that larger perspective about our national reform in Singapore. And this was also something very recently reminded to us by our Minister for Education, because we are a very new country, as you all will know. Right? We only came to self-government in 1959. We have just celebrated 46 years of independence as a nation. But in that space of time, we have seen how education in our country has had to support and in fact shape the very complexion of our country. There's a line that comes in the letter of appointment for every principal in a Singapore school. And this to me is a very important line because it reminds me of the weight of my responsibility as a school leader. And I'd like to share that line with you. Through your hands passes the future of the nation. And that must remind us what our work must be about. We are molding the future of our nations. And schools collectively, systems collectively across the world are therefore involved in the same work. We are, as educators, shaping the future of the world. It's really, really important to remind ourselves of that. So in Singapore, the education system has evolved to support national change, nation building, national growth. And over the years, we've actually seen our system grow from one that is very much survival-driven as a young country, moving on to efficiency-driven, where we then look forward to being able to get greater productivity, putting more people in schools, and producing more graduates for the economy, and eventually, in the late 90s, moving on to something that is far more familiar to us today, which is ability-driven education. So in the context of this, really, our minister has also reminded us, and as educators in Singapore, we are all very, very much aware of this, that there are certain key fundamentals, and I've really just picked out three, which for me has always made so much sense and has always reminded us that as educators, the real question to ask about education change is not what must be changed. And I'd really like to share this perspective with you. The real question for me to ask about what education change should be is what should not be changed. Because then the space for change, it's a very easy answer. Because the question to be asked is what needs to be changed, therefore, would be what would the children's needs be, and what would be the economy's needs, and what are the nation's needs, and what are the world's needs. So what should not change should always be unwavering. And for us, the fundamentals have been this. Education in Singapore has always focused on holistic development. And this is something that is more recently conceptualized for us as an education system. And if you looked at this diagram, this is what conceptualizes what for us we believe to be a fully educated person who can be a meaningful, contributing citizen, someone who can take on life in its fullest meaning and negotiate the world and the changes that come with the world's changes. Well, if you look at that, it really looks at holistic education. It looks at cognitive, moral, aesthetic, physical domains of education in every way. This guides us as schools in translating the curriculum and the programs for our children. Second fundamental, which for me is really important, is that no matter what change has taken place, no matter how policy initiatives have changed to continue to shape the education system, rigor and high standards must always be key. And we've always set ourselves very high expectations. These are the PISA results for Singapore. 2009 was the first time Singapore took part in PISA. And this has been very encouraging. And this, for schools on the ground, really allows us to understand what our work does with the children in terms of helping them really rise to their potential in the world. Right? So we're very, very, this is heartwarming, very encouraged. These are the results for Singapore. And in terms of rigor and high standards, in line with what McKinsey's report shows, we too find that we have the same philosophy, that quality outcomes can only come from quality teachers. And if you're familiar with our system, we have put a lot of emphasis on selecting only the best from the top 1/3 of every cohort to be in the teaching service. And after that, we train our teachers well, we look into professional development, and increasingly schools are taking charge in terms of creating that network of learning across schools for our teachers. And the third fundamental that I'd like to share with you really is about diversity. Going back to the best possible instruction for every child, inherent in that statement is an understanding of heterogeneous needs, diverse needs. Every child is different. And hence every school